Hi, Sandy.
Amy, hello.
How are you today?
Podcast day. I'm great. How are you?
Podcast day. Good, good. It's kind of a dreary, rainy day today. And I just took my dog for a walk and I went outside and it wasn't raining. It was supposed to rain all day. And I went outside and I expected rain and there was no rain. So I was very happy on my little walk because it was nice without any rain. I'm sharing that story because today we're talking about expectations. And me, I went out expecting the worst, which was rain because the ground was wet, but it wasn't raining. And so I was pleasantly surprised. So let's talk a little bit about expectations, the good, the bad. Um, there's a lot of aspects to having expectations or not having expectations. And so you brought this to us as a topic.
Mhm.
And do you want to share your story?
Yeah. I think a lot of times expectations are just part of our everyday living. And I'm going to say, as Americans, right? It was coming from international travel that I had a great conversation with my traveling buddy, Christy, on our last hike, because expectations are just part of, we fill in our calendar, we have our day, we think about all the things we do, we look at our weather apps, we plan what our week's going to be like, we plan ahead for when our kids are younger, what their weeks are going to be like, what our goals are. Everything we do is around expectations. And I'm not saying that it's bad, but I think I came from a place of thinking it was only good. We needed to have expectations. And the reason why we thrive is because we set expectations for ourselves. We set expectations for those around us. And I got a completely different perspective after going to Patagonia. And a little bit more to unwind it. I've been, and you and I talked about this, Amy, after I went to Patagonia, I originally thought I'm going to write one big blog story. I write, and I thought it would be one story. Well, it ended up being me writing a story for every day. And I got to tell you, it's probably been the most popular writing series I've had since Ben was in high school. It's just really taken off. And what I have found is what people find it very interesting, but I think they especially find it interesting because every day what you would expect and what happened are two completely different things. Okay. And so I think part of it in my brain too, and this is after that even reinforce this is a good conversation, was the fact that most people really found it intriguing that I did something that wasn't just check the box. Everything I saw from the drone on the website was exactly how it came out. But to start our conversation and to finish mine, where it came to a head on our last day of hiking was our guides. If you looked at our guides, who are extremely knowledgeable, capable, trained, they did nothing off of expectations. They were highly skilled at adaptability. And so we had a wonderful hike and a wonderful experience. They would tell us what to expect in hardcore, here's how many miles, here's the day. But when it came to the weather, the conditions, how your body felt, layers, those were all forms of adaptability. And what you got was how you responded to the uncontrollables and how you changed and adapted to the things you could control. And it was just a wonderful lesson in experiencing life from adapting, rather from a point of being adaptable rather than a point of being expectant. And the other comment that Christy and I made to each other is how we are so sheltered. And I'm just going to say, as Americans, we feel like, okay, I go to use a restroom and I expect it to work and I want shelter. There are all these things that we expect and want, and everything needs to work a certain way. And to go to a culture in a country where you really expect nothing other than the land, and you wake up and you breathe, and rather than expecting, you're experiencing. and you're adapting. And it was just, it was probably my biggest takeaway of the entire 14 days is to have more of a adaptable personality and more of an experience rather than being expectant.
Sandy, that is a beautiful takeaway. As I'm listening to you, because I've been doing some research and reading on this, and I think like we all fall on this spectrum of expectations we have for ourselves and expectations we have for others and other experiences.
Mhm.
And what from the reading I'm doing is it's when we have rigid expectations that we often feel disappointed. Okay. Right. So you have this really rigid, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. It's part of our group.
I noticed the dog is barking. Sorry. I'm going to try to cut this out. She should be done now. Okay. So, Bella, stop. Okay. So these rigid expectations are the things that get us in trouble because they're really high expectations or really low expectations. And then that circles into disappointment. And either disappointments in the circumstances or sometimes even disappointment in ourselves that we got something wrong, like
Right.
that we weren't right. Like we start to get hard on ourselves, like, oh, I was wrong. Oh my gosh. So then it's this whole cycle of self-worth. Like, so when we get rigid, there's some drama to it. There's some about, it was very interesting reading through this.
But think about when you get great expectations about first dates. Okay. Somebody set you up, and we're just going to go back before time.
Yeah.
You have this dream person, right? And you have created this expectation of the best everything, or,
Yeah.
wedding event. And it's so unreal to a certain point because we've created this expectation in our mind that even though what should be wonderful and beautiful can be a letdown because you're even worried that you're not meeting all the expectations you've set for it, because you're pre-rating how it's going to come out.
Right. Well, I think about raising children. Like you have these beautiful picture expectations of all the moments of motherhood that are going to happen. And the reality is that children are hard. Like they do not behave picture perfectly all the time in your expectations. Like I always thought, okay, my expectation for my children, and I know this is probably setting the bar really low, but I want them to try and I want them to be kind. So those are kind of two just very basic. I don't need them to excel because when you start setting that expectation of excelling,
Right.
there's going to be a point where they're not the best. And
Right.
so, and that's good for them to experience that. But you start to set yourself up to be disappointed.
So what kind of started even in my mind, the whole expectation right before we started Patagonia, before we had no cell service, I got a text, and a very nice text from a friend of mine. And she said, "You've been waiting for 2 years. Oh my gosh, is this meeting your expectations?" Because our husbands had been planning it. It got delayed because of COVID. And the reality was, because we are very grateful that our husbands plan these trips. Christy and my running joke is we just kind of show up. And because of that, we don't have expectations. What we're expecting is really what we talked about is, here's what we expected going in. Nobody got hurt. We had a great adventure and we shared life with our spouses and the two couples that like to travel together, and that we could be immersed in a new culture. That's really where our expectations. And I didn't know how to answer her when I got that text, because I thought, does it mean my expectations were, or my expectation? I had to think about what my expectations were.
Right.
And then I had to rethink it and think, am I bad? Should I have had higher expectations?
No, you know what? Expectations are expectations, good or bad. I think you're fine. So I have a question for you. How did the guys feel? Like, since they were the ones planning, did it meet their expectations, or how did they feel coming out of the experience?
I'm going to have to ask that specific question. We had a lot of talks about every day, there were, so back to adaptable, and it's hot in my mind because I just wrote this blog. And we talked at the end about what our entire group, about what our favorite moments were. Gosh, was Tom's the avalanche? I'm going to go with Tom's was the avalanche that we saw. That really, here's our expectation of that hike day. We knew the beautiful scenic French Valley pictures. So our expectation was we were going to get to the top, that we did it. We'd have these wonderful panoramic photos. Okay. Snowed, blizzard, could barely see in front of you. But then after we got up there and we were literally like, okay, take some kind of a photo and let's get back down. Joey yelled avalanche, and we just stunned watched. We weren't in danger of this beautiful avalanche, right? And I talked about this in our last episode, but that was not an expectation, right? But that was the highlight of his trip. Garrett was seeing pumas. And so what I tell you is they loved the trip. It met their expectations of adventure. It met their expectations on how many peaks and miles, the general, the guide showed up, we were taken care of, nobody got hurt, we had food, we had shelter. Was any of that as we envisioned it or exactly what it looked like online? No, but I tell you, the trip exceeded expectations for everyone, but it wasn't as we had envisioned it.
Yeah, that's well said. So I have an expectation story for you, because as we were talking through, when I was thinking through these expectations, when we were in New York City last weekend, we somebody had to use the bathroom. Maybe there was a group of 10, so there could have been a few of us that needed to use
And
the
we know
restroom.
what age we are, so
Yeah. So there was like, we're walking the streets, we're trying to find a restroom. Okay. Well, we stumble across a man on the street telling us to go up the escalator to Margaritaville. And
hey,
okay, we're like, all right, well, they'll have restrooms, so we're gonna get a drink at Margaritaville. So we're going up the escalator, and the whole time I'm thinking, I can't believe we're in New York City and going to Margaritaville. Like, really, is this what we want to do? In
right.
my mind, I'm like, this is a chain. We could do so many other things. Like, why, blah, blah, blah. So going into it, my expectations were really low, because we're all going to order a drink. We're all using the bathroom, which, perpetuates the need to use the restroom by drinking more. Anyway, we were setting ourselves up. Okay, so we're there. The DJ is there playing some music. He had a Providence t-shirt on.
Okay.
We're all there for Creighton, cheering on Creighton, who's, in another different bracket than Providence. We weren't playing them, but it's all the same division. So we're like, start talking to the DJ, ask him to play a song. Then the manager comes over and starts talking to us. And, we're just all having a really nice time. Well, the manager says, I want to take you guys up to the rooftop. And so we're like, okay, let's go. And so Carlos, our lovely friend Carlos, took us up to the rooftop, bought us a round of drinks. The rooftop was amazing. We ended up spending at least an hour, if not two, on the rooftop. There was
Beautiful, I bet.
beautiful views, a bar. Carlos, we actually got his number because he had a connection for tickets, We were texting him back and forth. He was like, if Creighton wins, come back for more drinks. And he was buying more drinks for us. Anyway, I went into that Margaritaville experience thinking, wow, like let's do better than this, and walked away with an amazing evening, photos, and it was it was because I didn't have high expectations and I didn't insist on doing something that was going to meet my expectations. You know what I mean? I just kind of went with it. I'm like, okay, let's just go with it. We'll do something better later. We're going to get a rest break. And it all turned out really beautiful, and really unexpected and fun.
And I think what I have struggled with in thinking through this is the message shouldn't be you should have no expectations, right? Because that's wrong. And it's so easy to say, oh, look, Sandy went to Patagonia, Amy went and had fun in New York. Just forget all the expectations, have no expectations. But I think it's about being open-hearted and open-minded and not so rigid on our expectations, and also know that chill out a little bit on the expectations. Just,
Right. Right.
general is good, but when you get back to like playing the stories in your mind of what they're going to look like, that's when you got to stop. Don't tell yourself stories, live it,
Yeah. There is no way to go through life with no expectations.
Right.
I mean, we have expectations. The other morning, my husband got up on Tuesday morning. This is actually kind of comical. Tuesday morning, he got up and we were out of coffee. And he was like, where's the coffee?
That would be very, very tough for me. That is an expectation I have.
Well, we'd been traveling. He made coffee on Monday. He ran out, but he thought we had coffee somewhere else. So it was just kind of like, and so Tuesday, he was like, where's the coffee? And I'm like, I didn't know we were out of coffee. So anyway, we had this whole conversation, and so we live in a land in we live with expectations all the time. Like he just expected that there was coffee somewhere in the building. And so thankfully there is in our apartment complex, there's a place where we can go grab coffee. And so we did, but it was kind of funny. But we do have expectations. There's no way to avoid it. You constantly have expectations of the weather. You have expectations of timing of people showing up.
Right.
You know, we have appointments. There's expectations all the time, but it's like what you said, it's about being adaptable, flexible, and not rigid.
And don't write the story, because life's going to happen. So don't, to me, it's having expectations to say, I'm in school, I'm going to get good grades, right? And it's good to visualize and say, maybe there's an award or something. But when you create the narrative before it happens, I think that's when you get in trouble. When you've taken the picture before it's taken, when you've been through the entire wedding ceremony before the wedding happens, set your parameters, have your expectations, set your expectations to people, but let the narrative write itself, right?
Yeah. Well, and knowing other people and their expectations can be helpful, because then you understand what they're saying about things. And here's an example. It's another bathroom example in New York City.
Nice.
We are sitting
That's
down.
our age group.
I know. I like these bathrooms. With a group of 10, somebody always has to use the restroom. Uh, we were at breakfast one morning, and one of our group went down to use the restroom at this restaurant. And she came back and we're like, how is the restroom? And at that point, we had started grading the restrooms. There were A, B, C, and so she came up, she's like, it was a B minus. And we're like, oh, okay. So just caution, we're going down there. Well, on the way down there, I don't think she saw all the stuff on the way, because three of us went down. The bathrooms were clean. Like I left, I'm like, okay, that was an A to me. So because there was a whole vault, that there was like a speakeasy down there and you could peek in. It was off and it had a vault and it was all red velvet and it was so fascinating and interesting to look at. I was like, oh, that's cool. It was closed, so you could just look in. And then the restrooms were clean. I was like, okay, what kind of expectations does she have when she comes to my house? So it was all very, we were laughing about it. So we knew when this person rated a bathroom, we knew that, she had high expectations, where the rest of us, we were a little bit more like, just give me a clean restroom and I'm good. So knowing other people's expectations is helpful too, but not to change your expectations because of them. I think that's because if we would have all started thinking like her, we would have all been having to walk back to the hotel to use our own restroom instead of being okay with
Right.
being in public restrooms.
How about the words, that isn't what I expected? Have you ever encountered somebody like, I remember one time, and actually he was right, but have you ever been taken aback by somebody saying, like, you introducing, go back to a boyfriend at one time or a friend, and then later somebody close to you saying that isn't what I expected, and then there's that dead silence on, do I ask what they expected or what was wrong? But those, what about when somebody, it isn't what somebody else expected and you've either provided it or it's a negative on you? Have you ever experienced something like that?
Oh, I am sure um yes. I'm just thinking through being with my son in New York City, and I took him to the Met Museum, and he was a good sport. But when we went to one area, he was like, yeah, that's not what I expected. And I was like, it wasn't what I expected either.
Right.
But I was like, okay. But here's what I think. I think that happens. Like we all have those things, and not to take it personally. We talk about this quite a bit. It's not a reflection of you that somebody had different expectations than what you provided. As long as you were transparent and authentic and bringing this forward, it, and then does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you were like salesy on something, and really confident that somebody was going to love something, then that gets into a little bit like, if your expectations were that somebody else was going to love something, then that can just set everybody up to be,
Really
yeah,
back there a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah. So what was
Right.
the situation? Do you remember?
Well, I can think of a couple different ones. I remember one time I had started a new position and I was really talking up the CEO of the company. And my dad, what was interesting about it was then my dad first met him. I'd been working with him for a year. Everybody was always like wooed by the CEO because he was just a big salesman, a big talker, and oh my gosh, like they wanted on his bandwagon. I'll have what he's having. And
Yeah,
my dad's comment was, that wasn't what I expected. And I was just like, wow, I'm not used to hearing that. And
right.
it was actually a bit of a wake up call because that was a nice way of saying what everybody says, and the great expectation is not equal to what I am experiencing.
Yeah,
Um, it was, I'll never forget it because it was my first aha moment of somebody saw this from a different lens because everybody was following the Pied Piper.
right.
So in that case, I think it was actually a good one, but it did take me aback. I remembered those words.
Yeah,
He wasn't what I expected. And I
right,
thought, and I didn't ask right away, what did you expect? I was just so taken aback by them
right.
because you do immediately almost take it personally, like, wow, I think I've been really talking this person up. And what didn't he expect? And it,
Yeah,
and I think I did ask later, and he just said it just wasn't, he did not come off as confident or um, as confident or as knowledgeable as I thought. And okay.
yeah. I think like in that scenario, I could see being a little defensive. I would be defensive of, oh, but didn't you
Great
notice
guy. Didn't you tell
like a
me?
white, and starts trying to reinforce what you've shared already. Um, I've done that before. But I'm like thinking of planning things and things not working out. I gave a referral one time to somebody, and they ended up hiring the person, and it didn't work out. But they tried and they tried and they tried. And I was really close to the person that hired this other person. Actually, I was close to both of them. And it was real. Felt so, I felt bad because I had given the referral. And they had hired them, and it was just a little bit of a like, okay, well, they also decided this was a good person. So I had to like step away and say, this is not all on me that this did not work out.
Right.
But I do feel like I played a part of that. It's hard not to feel bad when that doesn't work.
So how about expectations back to people close to us? We talked about our kids. We
Yeah.
laughed about our spouses, but we set a lot of expectations on others that are a little bit selfish, because really isn't part of setting expectations how we want them to make us feel, right? Or look. Well, what would be, if I have any kind of an expectation of a husband, a child, um, a friendship, isn't that, it doesn't have to be about me because I'm setting an expectation of what I need?
That's such a good question. Is it
But,
selfish?
but then I'm like,
It makes me think, is it selfish to have expectations of others?
well, I expect my husband to be honest. So is that a bad
Right.
expectation? I expect my kids to be kind, like you do.
Right.
So
I,
expectations, back to expectations, aren't bad things, but they sure can be if you don't keep them in check.
well, I think it all goes back to being rigid, you
Mhm.
know, like if I ask my husband, do these jeans make me look fat? I'd be a little bit like, maybe he shouldn't be honest,
Yeah,
like maybe that's when you should just say, oh, they look fine on you.
they're beautiful.
So
Beauty is.
there are times when maybe honesty isn't the best. But just being rigid, I think it's all about that rigid and not being flexible, not being adaptable, and not giving people the benefit of the doubt when they don't meet expectations, when things aren't as expected.
Right. And thinking through, is this about me or is this about our relationship? Like,
Yeah.
I expect you, back to setting a bar. If I set a bar for someone close to me, is it because is it something I need or is it something for them? Thinking through the motivation too.
Right. Like, just thinking about this, there are people who are very rigid because there are people who complain about weathermen all the time.
Mhm.
I think, you're being really rigid with your expectations of them. If that's where you're going to spend your time and energy of, they're trying their best. They're not perfect.
Right.
I think I think expectations. Now there's this whole thing about aspirations. Like I was reading about expectations, and along with that came aspirations.
Mhm.
And it had a lot to do with parents of children and their expectations and aspirations for them at post high school. A lot of parents have high expectations, and they were talking about shifting the expectations to aspirations, and aspirations are more about hope. Like, I hope that they're successful in this instead of being rigid and saying they have to do this to make
Mhm.
me happy. It's more of a hopeful mindset.
And it's got to be a hope that the other party wants too.
Yes.
the aspiration that they want. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about a story about a mom who said, she wanted me to talk to her child about choices he was making. And she said, and tell him he is not going to have this big house that we have if he keeps doing this. And I'm thinking, are you sure he's aspiring to want to have the big house?
Right.
I honestly think, gosh, why have a big house? Do you not want to talk to your spouse? You don't,
Yeah.
anyway, everybody has different aspirations, right? As Garrett and I like to say, you be you, but an
Yes. Good for you.
aspiration on somebody else's behalf, if it's not a hope they have for them individually, is probably not the right thing either. But I do like the word aspiration.
Yeah, I did too. When I was doing the reading, I was like, oh, that's
That's a good one.
a good one. I aspire to enjoy the rainy day.
I
All right.
aspire to find a clean bathroom and check out all the sites and meet some nice people along the way.
Exactly. And yes, I aspire to have some great sights in Patagonia.
I aspire to get at least 2 good pictures with the sun shining.
Very good. All right, let's talk real and ideal. The real in this is that we go into every situation with expectations, whether we're conscious of it or not. Sometimes it's in our subconscious, but everything, there's always expectations. I walked into this room and I expected the bed to be made just because nobody's been sleeping here. Now, if my dog came in here and messed it up, I'd be like, all right, that didn't meet my expectations.
Bella, did you have fun messing up the bed?
So, anyway, we always have expectations. So it's hard to move away from not having expectations. So the ideal would be
Don't be so rigid.
don't be so rigid. Yeah.
And don't write the narrative before it happens. Enjoy the ride a little bit. Be adaptable. Have expectations, but give yourself some room to enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Enjoy the adventure. Life is a journey. It's very fun.
Journey.
All right. Well, thank
Fun
you,
of
Sandy.
traveling. All
Great
right, Amy.
conversation.
Talk
All
to you
right.
next week. Bye.
Okay.